Hi, it's Ian here. This is a short video with some of my experiences on how to build senior executive relationships. And in particular, I'm going to talk about one strategy that I think is the most effective senior executive relationship building approach, but which no one talks about because it seems so counterintuitive. I'm doing this video in parallel with Argo Cluitins, who is posting his thoughts on video 2, so look out for that video. So first off, I'm going to let you into a little secret. Now don't tell anyone. Senior executives are actually human beings too. I know, hard to believe, but they are. Now of course they've had different experiences to most people, and their role means they've got different things to think about and different pressures. But at the end of the day, they're still human beings with the same needs and desires. In fact, the government of the Isle of Man recently commissioned a study into the psychology of chief executives. Now, by the way, if you don't know where the Isle of Man is, it's a self-governing British Crown dependency in the Irish Sea, somewhere between Britain and Ireland. Anyway, they wanted to know what would attract more senior business people to the island. So they commissioned this study, and they managed to get chief executives of 100 of the top 500 companies in the UK to complete a survey for them. One of the things they found was that chief executives basically want the same things in life as the rest of us. They want a decent work-life balance, they want to live in a safe neighbourhood where the kids can go out and play outside, and there's not much crime, basically the same desires as the rest of the world. But senior executives do differ in some ways from the rest of us in my experience. Now bear in mind that this is my experience, it might be different to yours, and of course it's an average. There are very many different types of people. But typically, you don't get to the top without being very self-confident and pretty decisive, pretty hard driving. And that's backed up by the Isle of Man research. Only 21% of chief executives said that they'd ever questioned their own judgment when they were challenged by others. And they tend to be what the study called intuitive decision makers. They go on gut feel rather than detailed analysis. In fact, they're typically not details people at all. So if you're interacting with a senior executive, don't waste their time. They haven't got much of it, and they're typically the sort of people who like to get straight to the point. And if you're trying to persuade them, all of those clever net present value and ROI calculations you learned at business school probably won't cut the mustard. Yes, chief executives focus on financial results, but they decide based on their instinct about something, whether it feels solid to them, whether it makes sense, whether they can picture, yeah, this is going to work. They don't decide based on detailed calculations and abstract numbers that don't seem tied to the real world. So you've got to draw a picture for them of the future, and they've got to be able to tie that future to their own experience so that they get that comfort level that this proposal makes sense and it's practical, it's achievable. Now what should you be talking about to chief executives, senior executives? What are the big issues they care about? Well, of course, everyone's unique, but a decade or so ago, a guy called Mike Davidson wrote a tiny little book called The Grand Strategist, which I think sums it up pretty well. He said that basically chief executives care about just three things. Where do I want to take my organisation? How can I beat up my competitors? And how can I manage my generals? Now, of course, there are exceptions, but by and large, if what you're talking to a senior executive about isn't the direction of the business, what their competitors are doing and how they're reacting, or how they're managing the organisation as a whole and their senior team in particular, then they're probably not really going to be interested. So that's a little bit about how senior executives think and what they're interested in. How do you get into a position where you're actually talking to them on a regular basis? How do you build a relationship with a senior executive? Well, I promised you my number one tip, and at the risk of sounding facetious, the very best way of getting a relationship with a senior executive is to build one with a junior executive and wait for them to become senior. Now, as I say, that sounds a bit jokey, but if you think about it, it's a lot more sensible than it first sounds. Today's senior executives have all sorts of people clamouring for their attention, desperate to become their trusted advisors, and they have all sorts of systems and assistants in place to bat them away so they can focus on doing their actual job and talking to the people they already consider to be trusted advisors, the people who built a relationship with them when they were junior executives. When they were more junior, they weren't overrun with all sorts of people desperate to meet them. They had more time, they were more accessible, they didn't have those kind of protection mechanisms erected around them to stop people getting access. They needed to prove themselves, and they were more open to people helping them out, to becoming their trusted advisors. So my number one strategy, if you want to have senior executive relationships, is to invest in building relationships with people before they make it to the top. And all those things we talked about in terms of the psychology and the interests of senior executives also apply to junior executives bound for bigger things. And here's another secret. Senior executives don't make all the decisions. Now, of course, we've all got stories of where we thought we had a deal tied up and then someone swans in because of a senior executive relationship and scoops it out from under us. But you know, one of the reasons we remember those events so vividly is because they're pretty rare. Most of the time, senior executives don't ride roughshod all over the hard work of their team. So yes, senior executives are always involved in big decisions, but very often they take the advice and guidance of their junior executives who've put all the work into understanding a situation and coming up with recommendations. So my long-term advice to build relationships with junior executives on the way up can also pay off in the short term. Now, I'm not saying don't try to build senior executive relationships. You'll see a lot of great tips in Argo's video for doing just that, and it's a vital thing to do. But you do have to be prepared for a lot of rejection before you get in there, and it's hard work when you do. You've got to be at the top of your game, thoroughly well prepared, and you're competing for attention with all sorts of other people and issues. So it's a very wise investment to make sure that in parallel, you're also building relationships with the future senior executives so that when they make it, you're already established as someone they trust. See you soon.